The first sound was not the sea. It was not the throb of the diesels still cooling in their steel casings, nor the faint drip of condensation from the pipes that ran the length of the control room. It was not the whisper of ballast shifting or the slow settling creak of pressure plates deep under the Atlantic. It was sharper than all of those things, clean, deliberate, artificial, a ping, then silence. Another ping. Exactly the same length apart, the same frequency, the same precision as though time itself were striking a metronome. In the sound room of German submarine U-442, 20-year-old Funkmart Karl-Heinz Weber lifted his head, frozen in disbelief. He had spent months training to distinguish every known sound the ocean could make. Merchant propellers, destroyer screws, even the far-off thunder of depth charges exploding miles away. He could tell the difference between a Liberty ship and a tanker by the rhythm of their propellers alone. But this sound, this high, piercing needle of noise, did not belong to any ship he knew. He raised one gloved finger, the universal order for silence. Every man in the control room obeyed. The faint murmurs died, and the boat seemed to hold its breath. The only sound left was that clinical, repeating tone cutting through the water. Ping, pause, ping. Captain Ernst Kruger leaned forward under the red glow of the instrument lights, his cap brushing the low overhead pipes. He was a veteran of 2 years of war beneath the sea, a man who had seen convoys burn through his periscope lens and who had felt the tremor of ships dying above him. He knew the familiar pulse of British ASDIC, their sonar that the Germans both feared and understood. ASDIC was short-ranged, directional, predictable. The British ships swept the sea in arcs, losing contact whenever they passed directly overhead. That weakness had kept men like Kruger alive. This was not that. The sound in Weber's headphones was tighter, higher in pitch. It did not sweep, it locked on. It held its note like a machine that had chosen its target. Weber turned the gain knob slowly, the sweat on his temple glistening in the dim light. "It's not ASDIC," he whispered. "Too clean, too narrow." Kruger's eyes narrowed. "Bearing?" 030 relative, constant. "Range?" Weber hesitated. "I cannot tell, Herr Kapitän. It's too precise." Kruger frowned. Too precise was not a phrase the sea allowed. Sonar echoes were never perfect. They scattered through layers of water, bent by salinity and temperature. But this return, the ping was uncorrupted. It was as if the water itself had become glass. The captain straightened. "Depth?" 80 meters and descending, replied the helmsman. The depth gauge needle quivered. The U-boat had crash-dived less than 10 minutes earlier after a radar warning from the surface. Somewhere out there, perhaps 20 kilometers away, an Allied aircraft or destroyer had detected them. The sea above was pitch black, no moon, only clouds, and the relentless Atlantic swell. Now they were deep, too deep for radar, they thought, and yet the ping still came, steady as a heartbeat. Ping, ping. Kruger's crew had heard stories filtering through the U-boat network in Lorient and Brest, strange reports from boats that never returned. Crews, speaking of an unknown locator, of Allied ships that seemed to follow them into the depths no matter how silently they ran. Dönitz's headquarters in Paris had dismissed those rumours as nerves. The British, they insisted, were not that clever. The sea was too vast, the technology too crude. But the young sonar operator knew what he was hearing now. He turned toward his captain, his voice a trembling whisper. "It's following us." Kruger did not reply. He listened, counted the seconds between each pulse. The precision terrified him more than the sound itself. Machines did not hesitate. Machines did not tire. And this was no human operator guessing in the dark. It was something systematic, something industrial. "All stop," he ordered quietly. The word carried through the hull like a prayer. The engines died. Pumps ceased their rhythmic hum. The fans went silent. The air thickened immediately warm, metallic and stale. Men froze where they stood. Even the cook, midway through cleaning the galley, stopped moving his cloth. In that instant, the submarine became a tomb. They waited. The hull creaked under the weight of the sea pressing down. Droplets of condensation rolled down the bulkhead, the only sign that time was still passing, and, still, the ping. Weber's voice was barely audible now. "Herr Kapitän, it doesn't lose us. It's fixed." Kruger closed his eyes. For the first time since the war began, he felt the pressure of the Atlantic not just around the boat, but inside his chest. For years, the U-boats had been hunters. They had ruled these waters, sinking merchant ships faster than the Allies could build them. They had believed themselves invisible, silent wolves slipping through darkness. But this sound, this needle of detection, meant invisibility was gone. It was not the randomness of chance anymore. It was arithmetic. "Take us to 150 meters, he said at last. "Slowly." The helmsman nodded. "Jawohl." Ballast valves hissed open, quiet but deadly in the silence. The submarine began to sink deeper into the black. Pressure grew, and the hull began to sing softly, a groaning steel hymn. The temperature dropped. The air smelled of oil and battery acid. At 120 meters, the first creaks became cracks. Men winced instinctively. Still the ping. It did not fade with depth. It did not warp or bend. It grew sharper, brighter. Weber looked up, eyes wide. "It's still on us, Herr Kapitän. The reflection is strong." Kruger's hands tightened on the edge of the chart table until his knuckles turned white. Above them, the surface hunters were aligning their tracks. He imagined a British destroyer now, perhaps an American one, its operators staring at an oscilloscope, tracing the U-boat's outline beneath them. They would be loading their new weapon forward-thrown projectiles instead of old depth charges. No warning roll, no time to dive. Just silence, then detonation. The captain exhaled slowly, the sound of defeat lost in the hum of the boat. "They can see us," he murmured. Weber said nothing. He adjusted the dial again, though there was no point. The sound was so exact it was as though the ocean itself had become a machine. For the first time in the long war beneath the waves, the crew of U-442 were no longer hunters. They were prey. Ping, ping. Each tone was a countdown, each echo a reminder that the Atlantic had changed. Up to March of this year, the sea had belonged to them. By May, it would not. Weber pressed his palms over his ears, but the sound came through the steel, through his bones. He thought of the ocean above the miles of cold black water that once had protected them, now betraying them. The captain whispered, almost to himself, "The ocean has turned against us." In the darkness of that steel coffin, with pressure clawing at every rivet and joint, the men of U-442 understood what no communiqué from Berlin would ever admit. The age of the silent hunter was over. The Atlantic itself had joined the enemy. And still, in that final silence before the attack, one sound endured perfect, merciless, eternal. By the spring of 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had entered its fourth brutal year. For nearly half that time, the German U-boats had ruled those waters. The mathematics of survival favored them, one submarine against 40 merchantmen, one torpedo spread against thousands of tons of steel and cargo. They had been hunters, patient and proud, striking unseen and disappearing into the black. But by April of that year, the numbers had begun to turn against them, and the men aboard those submarines did not yet understand why. The U-boat fleet had always trusted two constants, the sea and the machine. The sea, vast and secret, swallowed noise and light. The machine, built by German engineers, was precise and strong, a fortress under pressure. Between them, men like Captain Ernst Kruger believed they were invisible. If they went deep enough, ran quiet enough, the Atlantic would hide them. For 3.5 years, that logic worked. Allied detection tools, British ASDIC sonar and primitive air radar were limited by physics. ASDIC waves spread in cones, scattering as they met cold water layers. Beneath 150 meters, the ocean bent sound back toward the surface, creating blind zones where submarines could wait unseen. Convoys might pass directly overhead without knowing death lurked beneath. Then, in late 1942, everything began to shift. Somewhere in an English laboratory, the Allied scientists had turned a theory into an equation, and an equation into a weapon. Centimetric radar, operating on 10-centimeter wavelengths, was deployed on long-range aircraft and surface ships. Unlike the older, clumsy sets, this radar could pick up even the small conning tower of a submerged submarine running its snorkel or recharging batteries. It worked in rain, in fog, and at night. It erased the comfort of darkness. At the same time, the Allies began using Huff-Duff high-frequency direction finding. Whenever a U-boat transmitted a position report, Allied listening stations triangulated its signal within minutes. Every coded radio burst now betrayed a location. Every word sent to headquarters was a thread that led the hunters back. But the most terrifying innovation was still below the surface, the evolution of sonar itself. Until early 1943, Allied sonar used broad beams that faded with depth and lost contact when a destroyer passed, directly over a submarine. To attack, ships had to drop depth charges blind, hoping the charges sank close enough to rupture the hull. Many U-boats survived by simply diving deeper or turning sharply beneath the attacking ship. The new systems, however, changed everything. Using higher frequencies and stabilized mounts, Allied engineers created sonar that could track continuously, even while a ship maneuvered. These pings, those cold, precise needles of sound that haunted Weber's headphones, were part of that evolution. They were tighter beams, focused and unrelenting. They didn't search, they measured. And they guided something new. The weapon was called Hedgehog. Instead of rolling barrels of explosives from the stern, destroyers could now fire a pattern of 24 small contact-fused bombs from the bow forward, not behind. The projectiles arced ahead in a semicircle, falling silently into the water. They detonated only on contact, which meant the ocean stayed quiet until the exact moment of impact. That silence was deadly. The submariners never heard the approach. There was no thunderous warning, no growing roar of descending barrels, only the sudden shattering of their hulls. From the first engagement reports in early 1943, it was clear that something had shifted. British captains noted confirmed kills where none had been expected. Submarines that had evaded dozens of depth-charge attacks vanished after a single sonar lock and a single Hedgehog volley. The reports reached Admiral Dönitz's headquarters, but the explanation did not. German technicians scoured captured Allied debris, trying to reverse-engineer the new acoustics. They dismissed the possibility of a forward-firing depth charge as fantasy. Sound, they argued, could not remain locked at range. Yet Allied ships were doing exactly that. In the Atlantic, the proof multiplied. U-boat U-707, lost in November 1942. U-228, gone in December. U-442, the very submarine now trembling beneath the waves, would send its final transmission within weeks. Each disappearance marked the collapse of an old equation. For decades, naval warfare had obeyed geometry. A submarine could evade by diving deeper or changing course because sound spread predictably. The Allies had rewritten that geometry with machinery. Now the U-boat's steel skin might as well have been glass. The change was not immediate, but exponential. By March 1943, German intelligence noted the trend: increasing losses west of Ireland and north of the Azores. New Allied tactics, perhaps aided by improved radar, were turning convoy battles into massacres. Dönitz still believed it was coincidence or betrayal. Perhaps the Allies had cracked the naval enigma. In truth, it was not codes, but physics that had turned against them. For the men inside the boats, the change was sensory. They heard the shift before they understood it. Weber's generation of sonar operators knew when the Atlantic sounded wrong, the difference between chaos and control, between random sweeps and machine rhythm. The new pinging was inhumanly regular. No human ear or hand could keep such time. Kruger, listening in the dark, knew what it meant even before Berlin did. The Americans were entering the hunt. Their destroyers and aircraft carried not only British ASDIC but American electronics standardized, mass-produced and identical from ship to ship. Every operator, every vessel, every weapon followed the same frequency, the same logic. For the first time, the ocean was being searched by an industrial system. The Germans had built their U-boats like craftsmen, each slightly unique, each crew trained as if war was still personal. The Allies had made hunting mathematical. By the end of April 1943, 30 German submarines had been destroyed in a single month. By May, 41 more would follow. No fleet could survive such arithmetic. The hunters had become prey. And so, deep beneath the cold North Atlantic, the men of U-442 listened as that perfect, merciless ping traced their outline through the dark. They could not see it, but they could feel it, a new kind of weapon that did not kill through explosion or fire, but through knowledge. It was the moment when physics turned against them, when technology outpaced courage. It was the moment the sea stopped being their ally and became their mirror, reflecting every movement, every breath, every false hope. In the sound room, Weber lifted his trembling hands from the controls, staring at nothing, and whispered the truth that none dared speak aloud. They know where we are. At dawn, on April 10th, 1943, the North Atlantic was grey, heavy, and indifferent. Wind rolled across the swells, scattering foam like ash. Somewhere beneath that restless surface, U-442 drifted in the stillness of depth, her crew suspended between duty and dread. Captain Ernst Kruger had ordered the submarine to maintain silent running for 4 hours after the last ping. No talking, no movement. Even the galley fires had been extinguished. The temperature had dropped close to freezing, and the smell of stale air pressed down like the sea itself. In the sound room, Funkmart Karl-Heinz Weber sat hunched over the hydrophone array, headphones clamped tight, eyes fixed on the black dials before him. His world had narrowed to 2 sensations, the hiss of the ocean and the pulse of his own heartbeat. For a while, there was only silence. The strange, high-pitched ping that had haunted them through the night was gone. The sea had returned to its natural language, the distant murmur of currents, the rhythmic groan of steel, and the soft crackle of plankton against the hull. Weber dared to whisper, "Maybe we've lost them." Kruger did not answer. He stood by the periscope well, staring at the condensation dripping from the ceiling. In the silence, every drop sounded like the tick of a clock counting down. The truth was, he did not believe in luck anymore. 2 years earlier, in 1941, the ocean had belonged to men like him. Convoys burned night after night. The British escorts were blind, their sonar too weak, their depth charges too slow. Each patrol brought new decorations, new tonnage sunk, new certainty that Germany could starve an empire into submission. But by 1943, everything had reversed. The British had radar now. The Americans had aircraft carriers sweeping the mid-Atlantic gap. And somewhere, deep in the heart of Allied laboratories, the invisible ocean had been mapped by equations that no sailor could see but every submariner could feel. It was not courage that decided battles anymore, it was technology. Kruger motioned toward the hydrophone operator. "Report bearings again. Full sweep." Weber adjusted the dial. The array rotated with a faint electric hum. Static whispered in the headphones, then something. Faint, distant, regular. Ping, pause, ping. He froze. "Bearing 025, Herr Kapitän. It's back." Kruger's gaze hardened. The sound had changed pitch slightly higher now, faster. That meant the source was moving toward them. "Depth?" he asked. 150 meters, the helmsman replied. Kruger's mind calculated quickly. They were near the thermal layer, the invisible boundary where warm and cold waters met, bending sonar like glass. It had been their refuge before. If they could slide below it, the signal might scatter. Down to 180 meters, slow descent, no noise. The order rippled through the compartments in silence. Valves turned by hand, motors disengaged. The submarine began to sink. The hull creaked like old timber under the pressure. Men could feel the sea closing around them, the weight of 200 tons of water pressing on every square centimeter of steel. But the ping followed. At 160 meters, Weber's voice trembled. "It's holding steady, Herr Kapitän." Kruger's stomach turned cold. The enemy was using something beyond his understanding sonar that ignored the ocean's layers, that sliced through temperature and pressure as though the laws of physics had been rewritten. He turned toward the control panel. Rig for silent running. No electric motors. No movement. The submarine settled like a coffin in the dark. For long minutes there was nothing. Only the sound of men breathing through clenched teeth. Then, faintly, Weber caught another noise through his headphones, a slow, distant rumble, like thunder rolling across the seabed. "Propellers," he whispered. "2 blades, maybe 3, fast revolutions, destroyer class." Kruger closed his eyes. "He's coming for us." The destroyer above them was probably one of the new American escorts, perhaps an Evarts class or a Buckley class. They were smaller than British destroyers, but faster and equipped with the newest sonar and radar. They hunted in coordinated packs, trading sonar contact between ships, never losing their prey. In the early months of the war, U-boats had chosen their moments of attack. Now, it was the surface ships that dictated the tempo. The sound grew louder. Ping, ping, ping. The intervals shortened. The echo grew sharper. Weber felt his stomach twist. "Range closing," he said. "Very close now, less than a kilometer." Kruger's hand hovered over the alarm switch. He knew what would follow. The Hedgehog. The first pattern would come soon, 20 or more contact bombs fired ahead of the destroyer, falling silently until one of them struck steel. Unlike the old depth charges, Hedgehog attacks gave no warning, no roaring descent, no bubbles of terror before the end. Just silence and then destruction. Kruger whispered a prayer to no god in particular. "All hands brace." The next ping came louder, brighter, filling the hull like a bell struck underwater. Weber winced as it vibrated through his bones. Then there was another sound, softer but unmistakable, a distant whine, a mechanical cough of compressed air. "They've fired!" Weber cried. Kruger gripped the periscope well, knuckles white. He could hear them now, the faint splashes above, the falling of metal through water. The seconds stretched like hours. Then nothing. No explosions, no roar, just silence. Weber counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3. A flash of light, a sound like the earth breaking. The hull shook violently. Instruments rattled. One of the men screamed as pipes burst in the aft compartment. "Damage control," Kruger shouted. "Report." "Pressure hull intact," came the answer. "But we've taken shock damage. Stern ballast leaking." The captain steadied himself. The destroyer had missed, but not by much. "Hold depth," he ordered. "Do not surface." Above them, the destroyer circled, searching again. The pings returned, fainter this time, as though the hunter were reconsidering its aim. Kruger exhaled slowly. He looked at Weber, who sat rigid, headphones trembling in his hands. The captain spoke quietly, almost to himself. "They know where we are, but they don't need to find us twice." He turned to his first officer. "Prepare for silent drift south. We'll let the current carry us. If we move, we die." As the submarine eased into the deep current, the pings faded, still precise, still terrible, but farther away now. Weber removed his headphones, his ears ringing with phantom echoes. "What was that, Herr Kapitän?" Kruger stared into the dim red light, the fatigue lines etched into his face. "Something new," he said. "Something that makes the sea no longer ours." And in that moment, deep beneath the cold Atlantic, every man aboard U-442 understood that the war had changed forever. They were no longer predators. They were the hunted. By the time dawn broke across the storm-lashed Atlantic on April 11, 1943, the war beneath the waves had changed forever. U-442 drifted in the dark, engines dead, batteries low, and hope running thin. The sea pressed against her hull like a slow, relentless hand. Inside, the air was heavy with oil, sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. Captain Ernst Kruger leaned against the chart table, staring at the trembling compass needle. He knew the destroyer was still above them, somewhere in that grey void. The sonar pings had faded, but only to reposition. The hunter had not given up. "Batteries at 40%, reported the engineer, his voice thin. "If we hold at this depth another hour, we'll have to surface." Kruger nodded. He didn't answer because there was no safe answer. To surface was to die. To stay below was to suffocate. At the hydrophone station, Karl-Heinz Weber kept his headphones pressed so tightly they left red circles around his ears. He heard the faint murmurs of the sea, but beneath them, deeper, colder, was something else. A whisper of metal, the soft churn of propellers. And then, faint but unmistakable, the return of that terrible sound. Ping, ping, each one more distant now, not aimed directly at them but sweeping the ocean like a blade through fog. "They're widening their search pattern," Weber murmured. "Zigzagging east and west. They don't want to lose contact." Kruger exhaled slowly, eyes on the depth gauge. "They will not leave until they find us." He was right. Above, the destroyer USS Swanson, one of the new American escort ships, was holding a contact on her new Model Q sonar. The operator aboard her bridge, Petty Officer James Worth, was adjusting his gain knob, tracking a faint return that flickered like a ghost beneath the thermocline. He didn't know the name of the submarine below, nor the men inside. He only knew the sound pattern, a distinct echo that returned 2 milliseconds faster than the deep ocean clutter. That echo meant steel. Worth's captain, Lieutenant Commander Francis Beale, leaned over his shoulder. "Range?" 400 yards, sir. She's trying to stay under the layer." "Hold steady. Prepare another Hedgehog pattern." Beale's destroyer turned into the wind. The gunners on deck reloaded the forward throwers with 24 fresh projectiles, each fitted with a small contact fuse. No explosion unless one touched metal. It was a weapon designed for silence. At 200 meters below, Kruger could not hear the ship's engines now, only the ocean's endless groan. He thought of home, of the port at Kiel, of his wife's last letter before he sailed, and then of the men under his command. 27 lives, sealed in this pressure hull, waiting for his decision. "Prepare to surface at dusk," he said at last. "We cannot stay hidden forever." His first officer stared at him in disbelief. "Herr Kapitän, we'll be spotted by aircraft." Kruger's gaze was iron. "If we stay here, we drown. If we surface, we fight." Weber looked up from his station. "The pings are closing again." The captain turned toward the men. "Then we will fight." The next ping came louder, clearer. Weber's stomach dropped. "Direct bearing, 030, closing fast." A heartbeat later, the sound of water displacement reached them, the whisper of something falling. Kruger gripped the periscope well. "Brace!" The ocean erupted. The hull shook with a dull, massive concussion. One of the overhead lights burst, showering glass across the control room. "Pressure hull holding," the engineer shouted. "No breaches." The captain steadied himself. They missed again, but he knew they would not miss forever. For the next 30 minutes, the destroyer above circled, dropped another pattern, and then another. Each time, the submarine trembled but survived. Each time, the crew grew more certain that survival was a matter of mathematics. One of those bombs would eventually find them. At last, silence returned. The pings faded into nothing. The destroyer had moved off, perhaps chasing a phantom echo. Kruger waited another hour before speaking. "Prepare to surface. Dusk is coming. We'll take our chances in the open." The men obeyed. Ballast tanks hissed. The submarine began its slow ascent, rising toward the fading light. At 20 meters, the water brightened to a dim, sickly green. The periscope broke the surface, dripping salt water. Kruger took one quick sweep of the horizon-grey skies. No ships in sight, no aircraft. "Surface," he ordered. The hatches opened with a hiss of air. The smell of salt and cold wind flooded the boat. The crew gasped for breath, like men reborn. For now, they had escaped. But the sound still haunted them, echoing in their skulls the perfect, merciless rhythm of the ping. Kruger stared westward, where the sun sank beyond the endless horizon. He knew this silence was temporary. The Atlantic, once their hunting ground, had learned to speak their name. By mid-April of 1943, the Atlantic had become a graveyard. The great wolf packs that had once prowled in triumph were being slaughtered faster than new boats could sail. In the bars of Lorient and Brest, once full of swaggering crews boasting of sunk tonnage, silence had replaced laughter. Men drank in quiet dread, reading casualty lists pinned to the walls by nervous clerks. At sea, Captain Ernst Kruger of U-442 felt that shift in his bones. The surface had become an execution ground. The sky itself was now the enemy, alive with aircraft whose radar saw through cloud and darkness alike. The ocean's surface shimmered not with safety but with betrayal, a thin membrane that separated men from destruction. On April 12, 1943, Kruger's boat surfaced again under cover of fog. The batteries were almost dead, air was foul, and the diesel engines rumbled weakly. The crew worked in exhausted silence, gulping the bitter air. The captain stood on the bridge, scanning the horizon through binoculars streaked with salt. "Radar sweep clear," reported the watch officer, his voice tight with fatigue. Kruger nodded. "Proceed course 180. Speed 10 knots." Below, Weber sat at the listening station even though they were on the surface, his headphones still clamped to his ears, his mind haunted by phantom pings. Every hiss of static, every ripple of the propeller wash made him flinch. Sleep no longer came easily. In the distance, unseen beyond the fog, a Liberator bomber from Coastal Command swept low over the waves. It carried something new, an ASV Mark III centimetric radar set, operating on frequencies that no German detector could yet sense. To Kruger's crew, the sea seemed empty. To the bomber's operator, their U-boat glowed like a lantern in the dark. "Contact, range 6 miles," the radar man called out over the intercom. "Strong return, definitely a sub." The pilot banked hard into the wind, throttles roaring. In his bomb bay hung 4 depth charges, set to explode at 25 meters. The Liberator's navigator marked the target's course with cold precision. On the surface below, Weber suddenly tore off his headphones. "Engines fast overhead!" Kruger's eyes shot upward. The fog broke just long enough to reveal a dark shape with 4 engines descending fast. "Crash dive!" he shouted. The alarm bell rang, the shriek of metal echoing through the boat. Men tumbled down ladders, sealing hatches. The diesel engines died as electric motors whined to life. Valves hissed. The ballast tanks filled. The submarine plunged beneath the surface, the ocean closing over her like a lid. Seconds later, the first explosion struck. The boat heaved as if struck by a hammer. Lights flickered. Instruments shattered. Men screamed. A second. Blast followed closer, sharper. Then a third. "Forward compartment flooding!" someone shouted. "Bulkhead holding." Kruger braced himself against the periscope well. "Blow main ballast! Emergency rise!" But the compressed air system stuttered. The pipes hissed weakly, leaking. The submarine shuddered again as another detonation rolled through the water. Weber clung to his console, blood trickling from one ear. The pings were back now, deafening, rapid, overlapping. They came not from a ship this time, but from the air itself. Sonobuoys dropped by the bomber, floating on the surface, listening, hunting. The ocean had been filled with ears. At 100 meters, U-442 leveled off, half floating, half sinking. The crew waited for the next strike, but it never came. The Liberator had turned away, low on fuel, leaving its sonobuoys to whisper to the sea. Inside, men coughed in the thick, sour air. Kruger's hands trembled on the chart table. His world, once ruled by calculation and courage, was now ruled by statistics, ratios, frequencies, probabilities. "This is no longer a war of men," he murmured. "It is a war of machines." Weber looked up from his ruined station, face pale under the red emergency lights. "What chance do we have now?" Kruger did not answer. In that moment, he knew what the future would bring. More aircraft, more radar, more pings. The sea that had once hidden them would become a mirror, reflecting every secret. Above, the Atlantic wind tore at the fog, and the sonar buoys drifted, listening. Each one sent its mechanical heartbeat into the deep, measured, perfect, merciless. To the men below, those sounds were no longer mysterious. They were prophecy. The wolves of the sea had been found, and soon they would be gone. April 13th, 1943, the North Atlantic, 200 miles southwest of Iceland. The sea lay calm, deceptively calm. A soft wind carried the smell of salt and iron. Somewhere, below that silver surface, U-442 crept at silent speed, her batteries nearly drained, her crew hollow-eyed and pale. The submarine moved like a wounded animal, running deep and running scared. Captain Ernst Kruger no longer believed in luck. The sea that had once hidden them now betrayed them at every turn. Every wave seemed to whisper their position. Every echo that touched the hull carried a warning. Somewhere above, unseen, the enemy was listening. The new Allied sonar QGB type had changed the very physics of war. It was faster, sharper, and more intelligent than anything Kruger's engineers had imagined. The Allied ships no longer hunted by instinct, they hunted by mathematics. Their sonar men sat before glowing dials that turned sound into geometry. They could measure bearing, distance, and depth within meters. They could hear a screw turning, a valve opening, a heart breaking. Inside U-442, the air was thick, metallic, heavy with sweat and carbon dioxide. Every man knew the numbers: 27 crewmen, 9 torpedoes, 0 hope. Since dawn, they had been submerged continuously over 20 hours without surfacing. The oxygen gauges ticked downward like clocks counting to extinction. Kruger stood beside the chart table, his uniform soaked with condensation. The red emergency lights painted his face in shadow. "Batteries at 15%, the engineer reported quietly. "We must surface tonight," the first officer said. "The diesels will recharge us. We can reach Biscay within a week." Kruger shook his head. "If we surface, we die before midnight. The Americans have aircraft on every patrol line. Their radar sees through fog and night." Weber, the young sonar operator, spoke from his corner. His voice trembled, but his words were steady. "Herr Kapitän, the sound is everywhere now. The ocean itself has changed. It reflects like steel. I can hear things I shouldn't, our own echo coming back twice." Kruger looked at him, frowning. "Twice?" Weber nodded. "Once from the surface, and once from below." The captain stared at the depth gauge 200 meters. Below them was nothing but cold black water, a void that should have swallowed all sound. Yet the echoes returned, sharp and metallic. "What are you hearing?" the captain asked. "I don't know," Weber said. "It's not natural." Kruger felt the chill rise through him. He had read reports, rumors of Allied submarines fitted with new acoustic devices, machines that could not only send sound but receive it like radar in the air. The British called them Type 145 hydrophones. The Americans had their own experimental systems that turned the sea into a network of listening stations. The Allies were building a sea that could hear. "Surface at dusk," Kruger said finally, his voice heavy. "We take our chance with the night." When dusk came, U-442 rose slowly toward the faint silver glow above. The ballast tanks hissed, and the pressure eased as the boat ascended. The surface broke in a burst of bubbles, and the hatch swung open. The air that poured in was cold and sharp and alive. Men gasped as if tasting the sky for the first time in years. Kruger climbed to the bridge and looked around. The ocean stretched endless and empty. No ships, no planes, just the wind and the dying sun. "Engines ahead 1/3, he ordered. The diesels roared to life. For a brief moment, the world felt normal again, the hum of the engines, the taste of coffee, the stars rising in the east. Then Weber shouted from below, Radar! Strong pulse! Bearing 240! Kruger's heart froze. Crash dive! The klaxon screamed. Men dove for their stations. The hatch slammed shut. Ballast valves hissed. The boat plunged once more into the abyss. Above them, the dark shape of a B-24 Liberator crossed the sky. Its belly turret opened, dropping 4 depth charges in a perfect line. The sea erupted in columns of white fire. The submarine shuddered violently as the shockwave slammed its hull. Lights flickered, and a pipe burst overhead, spraying oil across the control room. "Pressure hull holding!" the engineer yelled. "No breach!" Kruger's jaw tightened. Down to 200 meters. Steady dive. The boat slid into the black, deeper and deeper, until the light vanished completely. Every creak of the hull was a whisper of death. The air grew heavy again, filled with the smell of ozone and fear. Then, faintly, it returned. Weber's eyes widened. "They found us again. The same sound, Herr Kapitän. It's higher now, closer." Kruger clenched his fists. "How can they still hear us? We're below the layer." Weber swallowed hard. Maybe it's not them hearing us. Maybe it's the sea itself." The captain turned sharply. "What are you saying?" The young operator hesitated. "The sound isn't bouncing anymore. It's traveling through the water as if the ocean were carrying it forward. I can hear the same ping from 3 directions at once. It's like the water is listening." No one spoke. The only noise was the dull hum of the electric motors and the steady beat of that inhuman sonar. In the Allied operations room in Londonderry, a similar rhythm pulsed across a plotting table. The convoy escort USS Swanson had relayed coordinates from a new sonar array network, the first experimental integration of air-dropped sonobuoys linked by radio to surface ships. It was the birth of something new, coordinated acoustic warfare. On the map, each ping formed a circle of sound. Where the circles overlapped, the submarine's position appeared an invisible mark beneath the waves. The operators did not know the men inside, nor the fear their sound caused. They saw only data. Back below, Kruger felt the pressure rising as they sank deeper to escape. The depth gauge read 220 meters, dangerously near the boat's crush depth. The steel moaned under strain. Bolts popped. The air shimmered with heat from the electric motors. "Hold her steady," he ordered. "If we go deeper, the hull will fail." Weber pressed his hands over his ears. The pings were deafening now, echoing through the hull like a heartbeat that was not their own. Kruger looked at his men, 27 faces illuminated by red light, eyes hollow, lips cracked from thirst. "This is not the sea I knew," he said quietly. "This is a machine." Above them, another Allied destroyer joined the hunt. The sonar triangulated, the Hedgehog batteries loaded. In a few minutes, they would fire. Inside U-442, the captain closed his logbook. "If they find us," he said softly, "remember it was not courage that failed us. It was time." Then came the final ping, clear, perfect, close enough to feel in the ribs. The sea that once hid them now told their secret. And for the first time in history, the ocean itself had learned to speak. April 14th, 1943, the North Atlantic. The night was black and silent above the waves, but beneath it throbbed with noise, mechanical, mathematical, merciless. The Allied convoy lanes stretched across the ocean like arteries of sound, each protected by ships whose sonars beat in perfect rhythm. For centuries, the sea had been the last refuge of silence. Now, it had learned to talk in pulses and echoes. Captain Ernst Kruger of U-442 floated in that invisible web, trapped by forces he could not see or understand. The air inside his submarine was warm and wet, thick with the smell of men and machine oil. The electric fans hummed weakly. Condensation dripped from the ceiling like sweat from the ocean's brow. Every man moved slowly, conserving oxygen, listening for the next ping. For 3 days, they had been hunted. 3 days since that first strange sound reached their ears, a sound sharper than ASDIC, faster, more intelligent. 3 days since the ocean itself had turned against them. Weber, the radioman and sonar operator, sat with his headphones clamped so tight they had left red marks on his skull. His voice had become a whisper. "They're above us again, Herr Kapitän. 2 ships. One close, one farther east. The close one is moving in a circular pattern." Kruger leaned over the plotting table, tracing his finger across a faded map of the North Atlantic. His hands trembled, not from fear but exhaustion. "That's the Swanson and her escort. They're pattern tracking. The Americans don't guess anymore, they calculate." Weber adjusted his dials. The ping returned, clean and crystalline. Ting, ting, ting. Each note hit with metronomic precision, like a clock counting down the last seconds of a dying world. "This one is different," Weber murmured. "Not the same tone. It's shorter, higher, almost above hearing range." Kruger frowned. "They're changing frequencies." "Yes, sir," Weber said. "It's, how do I say, like music. They are sweeping the sea with notes, not noise." The captain felt a shiver crawl down his spine. "They're painting us with sound." He didn't know that above, aboard USS Swanson, Lieutenant Commander Francis Beale was testing a new tactic. His ship had been equipped with experimental sonar capable of alternating frequencies to penetrate temperature layers in the water layers that once shielded submarines from detection. The Americans called it frequency hopping. The Germans had no defense for it. The destroyer's sound operator, Petty Officer Worth, leaned forward over his screen. "Sir, strong contact, bearing 160, range 400 yards, depth estimated 200 meters. "Confirm range," Beale ordered. Worth adjusted the dial. The echo returned sharper, stronger. "Confirmed, sir. Target steady. She's sitting deep." Beale nodded grimly. "All hands to battle stations. Prepare for Hedgehog launch." The sea above U-442 came alive with motion propellers chopping the dark water, depth charges rolling into the racks, the faint mechanical hiss of compressed air. Below, Weber tore off his headphones. "They've locked us, Captain." Kruger closed his eyes. "Prepare for silent running. No noise, no movement." The submarine went still. The motors stopped. The lights dimmed to a red twilight. The only sounds were the soft hiss of air and the heartbeat in every man's chest. Then came the sound of the hedgehogs. Dozens of them, each no larger than a man, arced into the water like falling stars. They sank, silent until they touched metal. The first explosion came aft, near the engine room. The second detonated forward, splitting open a ballast tank. A third burst just above the control room, showering sparks across the instruments. "Damage report," Kruger shouted. "Minor flooding in compartments 3 and 5. The engineer yelled back. "We're still intact." The captain clenched his jaw. "Blow tanks rise to 100 meters." The boat rose, groaning. The pressure eased. The men dared to breathe again. But the sea was not finished with them. Above, Beale ordered another sonar sweep. Worth watched the glowing trace on his screen dance and return. "Still there, sir. Moving upward." Beale gave a tight nod. "Launch pattern Bravo. Fire." Another wave of hedgehogs entered the sea. Below, Kruger heard them falling dozens of faint plops like rain on a tin roof. He whispered a prayer. "Steady, steady." The explosions came faster this time, closer. A roar of pressure and light filled the boat. Instruments shattered, glass sprayed across the control room, and the lights went out completely. The hull groaned like a living thing, bending but not yet breaking. "Forward compartment flooding," the engineer cried. "Bulkhead seal failing." "Pump it out," Kruger yelled. Men scrambled through the darkness, wading through ankle-deep water. Someone screamed. Another man prayed in the corner. Weber pressed his headphones back on, desperate for information. What he heard made his blood run cold. "The pings have stopped," he whispered. Kruger turned to him. "Stopped?" "Yes, sir," Weber said. No sound, no engines, nothing. For a moment, silence filled the ocean. Even the sea seemed to hold its breath. Then, faintly, a new sound emerged, not a ping, but a rising hum, a mechanical vibration that filled the water like a pulse of energy. "What is that?" Kruger asked. Webber shook his head. "It's not sonar, it's something else. It's sweeping across the whole band." Above them, USS Swanson had deployed a new weapon sonobuoys linked by radio. The network was sending continuous low-frequency pings across a wide area, synchronizing between ships and aircraft. It was not searching, it was illuminating. The Allies had turned the sea into a radar screen. "We're finished," Webber said softly. "They can see everything now." Kruger stared at the bulkhead as if trying to look through it. "Then we make them pay for it." He turned to the torpedo room. "Prepare 2 fish. Set depth 40 meters. Aim by sound bearing." The men obeyed, trembling but resolute. The tubes flooded. Valves hissed. The captain raised his hand. "Fire 1, fire 2. The torpedoes launched, their motors whirring into the black. For a brief moment, there was hope. The sound of propellers slicing through the dark water, the possibility of vengeance. Then Webber flinched. "Countermeasure. They've dropped decoys, false echoes everywhere." On USS Swanson, the sonar trace split into 3. The decoys worked perfectly. Beale's ship dodged to starboard, and the torpedoes passed harmlessly beneath. Seconds later, the final depth charge pattern fell. The last explosion was enormous, an underwater thunderclap that ripped through the hull of U-442 like a spear. Metal screamed. The pressure bulkheads burst. Water poured in, unstoppable. Kruger stood perfectly still as the control room tilted. The charts flew, the lights died, and the sea came roaring in. In the final seconds, Weber's headphones filled with one last echo, the perfect, merciless ping of the Allied sonar. It was not a sound of hatred. It was a sound of precision, of progress, of inevitability. As the boat sank, the men of U-442 understood the truth. The age of the hunter was over. The ocean, once their shield, had become their executioner. Above, the destroyer's sonar screen cleared. The echo vanished. Lieutenant Commander Beale removed his headset and spoke quietly. "Contact lost." He didn't cheer. He simply stared out at the grey horizon and whispered, "The sea is ours now." But deep below, among the twisted wreckage, the echoes lingered endless, patient and cold. The ocean remembered, and it kept on listening. The wreck of U-442 came to rest on the floor of the North Atlantic at a depth no diver would ever reach. The pressure crushed her hull in seconds, sealing the bodies of her crew in a tomb of cold iron. Above them, the war continued, but the moment of their destruction marked something more profound than the loss of another U-boat. It marked the instant when the ocean itself changed allegiance. In the months that followed, the Allies tightened their grip on the undersea war. From May of 1943 onward, U-boat losses rose beyond recovery. More than 40 German submarines were destroyed that month alone, the worst in the entire Battle of the Atlantic. The hunters had become the hunted, and the pings that once filled Weber's headphones now echoed across thousands of miles of ocean. In the Admiralty's underground rooms in London, analysts plotted the results. The new sonar centimetric, stabilized and integrated with radar and air-dropped sonobuoys had turned the Atlantic from a battlefield into a network. It was the first time in human history that sound had conquered space. In captured diaries from German survivors, the same terror appeared again and again. Men wrote of the unseen ear, of the machine that could hear through water. Some swore that the ocean itself had learned to speak English. Others said they had heard a chorus of metallic bells just before death, as if the sea were tolling its own requiem. By the summer of 1943, Dönitz's proud submarine fleet was collapsing. His orders grew frantic, then desperate. "Avoid convoy battles unless conditions are ideal," he wrote. But ideal conditions no longer existed. The Allies owned the day, the night, and the depths. Every technological victory carried a human echo. The young men who once sailed from Kiel or Street Nazaire no longer sang their marching songs. They went to sea quietly, knowing they might never return. Their commanders called it the silent service, but by 1943, the silence was no longer voluntary, it was enforced by the pings. Each Allied advance built upon the lessons of the last. The American Navy developed Task Group Alpha, combining destroyers, escort carriers, and airborne radar into a single hunting unit. The British perfected the Lee light, blinding submarines that surfaced at night. The Canadians mastered coastal patrols. And everywhere, the new sonar, the same sharp, high-frequency signal that had terrified Weber in the dark, led the way. Historians would later call it the moment when technology replaced intuition in naval warfare. For centuries, sailors had fought with wind, instinct, and courage. Now, machines fought in their place. The sonar operator became the new warrior, faceless, calm, and infinitely patient. His weapon was precision, his shield was distance, his battlefield was invisible. In August of 1943, Allied intelligence captured fragments of German communications referring to unknown detection devices. The Germans gave them code names, Zauberohren, magic ears. Their scientists tried to replicate them, but the war was already turning elsewhere. The Atlantic, once Germany's weapon, had become its grave. On the ocean floor, the wrecks multiplied. Type 7 hulls lay scattered across the abyss like bones, each surrounded by silence. But even there, the sound remained. The pings that once killed them travelled on, reflected by steel, bouncing through the water long after the ships above had passed. Decades later, oceanographers would still hear those echoes on their instruments, tiny anomalies, faint pulses that seemed to repeat without source. Some said it was interference. Others said it was the sea remembering. In 1962, at a symposium on underwater acoustics in Washington, an American admiral spoke quietly of that turning point. The pings were not just sound, he said. They were the first words of a new language, the language of total detection. And in that same year, a German veteran stood at the back of the room, listening. He had once served as a sonar operator, just like Weber. After the war, he had emigrated to Canada, working on fishing sonar systems. When he heard the admiral's words, he nodded slowly. Later, he would tell a journalist, "The war ended for me, not when Germany surrendered, but when I first heard that ping. That was the moment I knew we had already lost." The sea had chosen sides not through hatred, but through progress. It had learned to reveal rather than conceal. The men of U-442 lay still beneath it, their final moments preserved in the silent black. Yet if you could listen closely enough through 1,000 meters of pressure and 70 years of time, you might still hear it. One sharp, perfect echo, fading into eternity.